I'm not sure whether this is going to go out and whether I'll share this with others, but since the start of lockdown and the coronavirus, it's been one of those things I've been wondering whether I need to say. I need to say for myself to get it out there, out of myself, and I need to say for others to hear, because it's a question people are asking, and that's, where is God? And as I'm thinking it through, I'm thinking of about 5 answers to that question, though I know there are more. There's a great study and lots of books written on this. But also that each of those answers has in itself an invitation. And my thought is I'll perhaps go through those a little bit and share then the invitations and see if that helps a little bit as people are trying to wrestle with this question. At the first level, we've got to look at where do we think God is in general. And one of the important places to see God is in his creation, in creating. And that's where the Bible starts, with ancient stories that were passed down from pre-written history by word of mouth and then written down, about God being the creator who shaped everything. And if we take that seriously and we look at it with the knowledge that we have about how the world is really made up, then we would understand that actually, even down to viruses, all of these are part of God's creation, all played a part in the creation and in the ongoing process. And that God is in the whole of it, right down to the smallest molecule, never mind the smallest form of life that we have around us. And that God is in the whole of his creation, and all of it is part of his moulding and his shaping. And I believe through evolution that God has guided that and shaped the whole of the world. But that in the creation narratives then leads us on to the second place that God is, which is in some sort of special relationship with humanity. He's given us the ability to think, to know right from wrong, to interact with our world in a way that no other animal does. He's given us the gift of free will, that we have choice. And God is in shaping somebody special to have a particular role within that creation. And that role includes stewardship over creation. Often we thought that meant domination over creation, but actually is much more about interacting well with the creation, and that would include then scientific knowledge, research, and then the gifts of medicine and interventions on this level with people. God is in all that, all of human knowledge, all of the humanity's ability to know and to make choices about what is right and what is wrong. And this also then means that God is in some way in the flow of humanity. The Old Testament stories of God choosing one particular community to somehow be influential then in shaping the whole of the world, and that flowing out from the Old Testament narrative into the New Testament narrative, that flowing God's grace and goodness out to all people. A light to the Gentiles is the way that Isaiah would put this. And then obviously we come to the idea that therefore God breaks into the world, and in some ways God can change the world. And this would be in the miracle stories of Jesus, but also in the Old Testament, that God can break in and change it. And this is the predominant question people often have when they say, where is God? Either talking about the Holocaust or now, why isn't God doing something obviously in this understanding of where God is? But this can also be in a larger picture of God guiding science and guiding people together. In the Old Testament, there's a story of Esther, and her people were in exile and were at risk of being under extinction. There was a plot against them, and she was in a particular position, and she put her own individual life at risk to bring a change about in circumstances for a whole people, and sort of to save her people. And Esther is remembered in the Bible because of that story. But then, as well, therefore, as God being able to intervene as an individual or at a geopolitical level in changing the narrative of the world, we most of all find God for Christians in the person of Jesus. And Jesus is God entering into humanity and into its suffering and ultimately dying on the cross. And for Jürgen Moltmann and others writing after the Second World War, with the horrors of the Second World War, they had to let go of that God that was there doing miracles, sort of perhaps a little bit distant from his creation, just do a miracle here, do a miracle there, and actually understand that God was in his creation with humanity, suffering with them in Jesus on the cross, and was alongside people in their suffering and seeking to love them and be with them in the darkest moments, a bit like a counsellor or a parent might sit alongside a child when they suffer, just to be with them as they are in that situation, even if they can't do anything. And in all these levels, therefore, there's an invitation to us if we see God at that level. If we see God at the level of creation and in all creation, then there's an invitation to see that the world is more interconnected than we cared to perhaps think, and that everything, right down to the smallest virus, is part of the way in which the whole world works together, and an invitation to understand that this is much more balanced, and it's not humanity over against creation and how we dominate over them, but we have to be much more integrated with creation and think through how we are part of the bigger creation. This leads then to the second question of where God gives us a particular place in stewardship and knowledge and the choice of right and wrong, the ability to make ethical choices. Do we make different choices as a community? Are we being invited, perhaps, as global nations, to spend less on defence and warfare spending on how we can destroy fellow humanity and more on how we can do shared research to protect our shared humanity and to protect the globe? And as we think through this level, that leads us on to the next sort of question about, is there an invite therefore for us to let go of that image of God as the one who's in the sky doing an odd miracle here and there? Yes, I still believe that God can do that. But if God has made the equivalent of a Lego representation of London, then he may make the decision just to change one brick from blue to green because it will better represent what he's trying to do. But he's unlikely to take the whole board and throw it all up, because all of those are good. And so therefore, though I believe that there may be, and people will be praying for miracles and that there may be ones that happen, actually that would only be God helping some and not God helping everyone. That would only be therefore a fickle God who only helped some. But what we need to do is to understand that actually God is in all these other layers of creation as well. And though I believe and pray for God to intervene, I'm not sure this will be the main way in which he intervenes. It may be that he intervenes on the more wide-scale level, that as we pray for our scientists and our doctors and nurses, that one of them will suddenly come across the cure in an unexpected way, a eureka moment, a dream at night, and suddenly find that there's an intervention that changes things quicker than can be possibly expected and changes things for the whole of the globe. But also I see God in and alongside those who are suffering, God alongside those who are finding it difficult in lockdown, God who's alongside those who are alone in hospital suffering from the coronavirus and finding it difficult to breathe. That God is alongside us in the suffering and bringing us compassion and wholeness and inviting us to understand his world differently, to make corporate choices, to live differently in the world, to seek to change our priorities on our ethical choices as individuals and nations. And much of this we see happening at the moment as industries repurpose to develop new technology to help to fight this, as we find that when humanity steps away, nature steps back in a way that nobody would have expected, in the way that nurses and doctors are giving up and about beyond themselves, even though they're putting themselves at risk, but to journey alongside those who are suffering and to care for them. And we find it in the way in which local communities are trying to connect using new technologies and support one another, do shopping for one another. All these are where I see God as being. So for me, it's all these levels. God is everywhere and is involved in this situation. And I don't limit myself just to thinking that God has to be the Lego master changing things from above, but that God is in this and with us and supporting us as we journey through.